Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is going to be your lesson on prokaryotic versus eukaryotic cells. And so these notes will actually go on page 7 of your notebook. And this is Friday's lesson. Your notes are going to be very, very simple. I will have a summary as well for you at the end of these notes. Okay. So our organelles notes were on page 6. So make sure that you know all of those organelles that we were talking about on our last meeting. And then today, which is Friday, you should be doing your prokaryotic versus eukaryotic notes. So I think I gave you a saying last week. If it's pro, then no. If it's you, then it do. So if it's a prokaryotic cell, that means that it does not have a nucleus. It's going to be very simple in its structure. They're also much smaller than your eukaryotic cells, and they're not going to have like a defined nucleus. And your eukaryotic cells are actually going to be very large, more complex than your prokaryotic cells, and they will have a defined nucleus. They're also going to have membrane bound or covered organelles. And remember that eukaryotic cells, prokaryotic cells will have some organelles. For example, they will have ribosomes, but they will be naked ribosomes, meaning that they're not going to have a covering around them. They're not going to have like a membrane that actually is going to protect them. So they're just going to be naked organelles just kind of floating around the cytoplasm. And so these are what your notes are going to look like. And I'm actually going to give you a summary that I would like for you to write down. So for starters, we're going to start here with our topic and our question. So the topic today is prokaryotic versus eukaryotic. What's the difference between the two? By the end of this lesson, you should be able to know that. So I should be able to ask you a question, and you should be able, off the top of your head, tell me whether or not it's prokaryotic or eukaryotic, or show you a picture, and you should be able to tell whether or not it's prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Okay. So your topic, which is actually at the very top of your notes, you don't have to write it again unless you just want to. And your essential question is I can compare and contrast prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So, what is the difference between a prokaryotic and a eukaryotic cell? This says GMAS 21, but this is actually GMAS 9. So, under a microscope, a series of cells are observed that lack membrane bound internal organelles. So, these organelles are going to be naked inside of the cell. Which of these is most likely the cell type? And your answer to this question is going to be D. This is a prokaryotic cell. There's also something I want you to write in your notes. All bacteria are prokaryotic. All bacteria on the earth is going to be prokaryotic. All right, so prokaryotic cells. Pro means before, so these are your first cells. And kary means nucleus, so before there was a nucleus. So that's really what prokaryotes mean, before there was a nucleus. So for number 1, that question asks, what is a prokaryote? And give an example. So this will help answer number 1. So these are cells that lack a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles, which means they are going to have organelles. It's just that these organelles are going to be naked and are not going to have a covering. An example of this is bacteria. Remember I just said all bacteria are prokaryotic. This is the simplest type of cell, so you can write that down in your notes if you want to describe it. And inside, it does have genetic information. It's just not going to be confined inside of a nucleus. It's just going to have one singular circular chromosome, and that singular circular chromosome is going to be quote unquote naked. Remember, these are not going to be membrane bound, all right? So here's what a prokaryote looks like. Very simple, very small. Some will have a cell wall and a cell membrane. Some. And if you plan on being a doctor, which I think a few of you have shared with me that you would like to be doctors, you have to know what is the cell structure of that individual bacterial cell so you can know how to treat it. Because there's certain enzymes and certain proteins that are on the outside of the cell wall of that cell. And so, in order for you to know how to treat that patient for that particular disease, you would have to know how to get inside of the cell wall and break it down so that bacteria will die. Okay, so this is why we learn this in biology. DNA, of course, in a prokaryote number 3, is going to be located in a nucleoid region, so the central region of the prokaryote. Okay, and then it will have a cell membrane and a cell wall that's going to be on the outside. Sometimes the cell wall is going to be made up of a material called peptidoglycan, and you need to know that because whatever the cell wall is made of will actually help doctors and physicians determine how they're going to kill this bacteria that's in your body. And so the cell wall is made up of it's kind of like a protein and a carb mixed together, and that helps us identify what type of bacteria it is. So what makes it up the cell wall? It's a material called peptidoglycan. You won't really need to know that for a test. I just wanted to let you know. So glycan, glucose, peptide, protein. So it's like a protein and a carb at the same time. Prokaryotic cells will contain ribosomes, but they just don't have, they're naked ribosomes that are floating around in the cell. They're going to just be floating around the cytoplasm. And what these do is they help to make proteins. That's what they're for. And so everything that's living is going to need proteins. So what organelle without a membrane is found in bacteria, and what is its function? It's a ribosome, and it's to make proteins. All right, so we've talked about the simple cells, and let's go on to the more complex ones. All right, so your eukaryotic cells will have a nucleus. Remember I said that the DNA in most eukaryotic cells is just too long, is too wide, it won't fit. It is a very large molecule. So therefore it has to be housed in a safe place. It cannot be floating in the cytoplasm. It just won't fit. And so they will condense, and they have their home inside of the nucleus. And so a nucleus has membrane-bound organelles. In the structure of chromosomes. So when we start talking about mitosis and meiosis, we'll talk about the chromosomes and how they actually unravel, how that DNA unravels, and how it kind of splits apart in mitosis. Eukaryotes, we are eukaryotes, plants, animals, fungi, protists, these are all considered our eukaryotes. Okay. They're more complex, they're bigger. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on with this cell. Now there's 3 basic structures that all eukaryotic cells will have, okay? It has to have a nucleus, and we're talking about eukaryotic cells. They have to have a nucleus. They have to have a cell membrane. Eukaryotic cells will not have a cell wall. That's a plant cell feature. Well, that's more of a prokaryotic cell feature. But there are some eukaryotic cells like plants that will have a cell membrane and a cell wall. But at the very minimum, they have to have a cell membrane. They will have cytoplasm with organelles. And I'll leave that there for just a second. And so your essential question says, what is the difference, the main difference between a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell? In your summary, that will answer that question for you. So I need for you to write this down in your summary at the bottom in your notes. And so just like I have my beautiful example here, I actually did this on yellow paper last year. Just write down your summary like right here at the bottom if you have room. So there are 2 types of cells. One's prokaryotic and the other one's eu. So remember, pro, no, eu, do. Prokaryotic cells were the first cells on Earth. They divide by a process called binary fission, which means to divide by 2 or to split up by means of 2. Both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells have genetic material, DNA and RNA. They have to have that. They both contain a cell membrane and cytoplasm. and they're both are going to contain ribosomes to help make those proteins. So those are your similarities between the two. Remember that your prokaryotic cells are smaller, your eukaryotic cells are larger. And this is your lesson on prokaryotic versus eukaryotic cells. Now, if you want to challenge yourself, I do have a few terms. Make yourself like a little chart and see if you can actually distinguish whether or not this is a prokaryotic characteristic or a eukaryotic characteristic or both. And then just kind of test your knowledge and see if you get it right. All right. So this is your asynchronous lesson on prokaryotic versus eukaryotic cells. Ta-ta for now.